In this video, I'm going to discuss a bunch of specifics about the oppressive nature of government. The topics of this video will be Native Americans, European settlers, the American Revolution, the first American government, the westward expansion, slavery, progressivism, the Great Depression, the Cold War, and modern America. I'll then explain what you can do on an individual level to prevent the United States government from becoming an oppressive force. If you're watching the full episode on the podcast channel, all sections will be timestamped in the description. If you're watching on the Clips channel, make sure to watch all episodes to get the best understanding on this topic. Hope you enjoy, and if you have any criticisms, leave them in the description below. Alright, now on to today's podcast. The best way to understand how the United States government has grown so large, it is best to go all the way back to where everything started. Humans first made contact with the Americas 30,000 years ago. They continued coming over from Siberia until 10,000 years ago when the Bering Strait melted and cut off access between the East and West. During these tens of thousands of years, these settlers spread across all of North and South America. Because these settlers were now in a foreign environment, they had to adapt to new living styles. One of the biggest adaptations was having to hunt bison rather than mammoth. They also continued to gather berries and seeds the same way they did back in Siberia. Further south in Central America, settlers taught themselves how to farm. These farms usually consisted of corn, beans, and squash. These cultures also taught themselves how to make spears for hunting out of local resources. These traditions moved north where farming became popular, and tools made it easier for fishing. By this point, these settlers can now be called natives due to living here for so long and creating their own cultures. Religion also was speculated to be developed with these natives because the mounds that they would build resembled that of a religious site. In the 12th century, societies began to form. Where St. Louis is today was a large 100-foot tall mound. Around the mound was a city of 20,000 people. The city was called Cahokia and was larger than London at the time. The city practiced a lot of what eastern cities were practicing at the time. This consisted of hunting, farming, and trading. They even used slavery for farming. Human sacrifice was also very popular due to the local religions. In more desert areas, natives built homes out of stone and adobe houses. At this point, oppression with the natives began. Not only was slavery a big example, but a large confederacy had formed out of a collection of small states, and had a military so large that it forced all of the smaller tribes to migrate west. As this does sound like the United States, it is not, nor is it the British Empire. These were the Iroquois. This government consisted of 5 local tribes. These tribes were the Oneida, Mohawk, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca tribes. How this government worked is very different from what we would think of today. This government did not have a single person in charge like the president. They used more of a parliamentary style government where they had 50 seats that would be filled by chiefs of each tribe. As this would be the end of an era of natives only having contact with other native tribes, it is important to recognize that oppression did not start with the colonizers but was inflicted by themselves beforehand. And if they were left alone, they would have formed a massive empire that functioned off of oppression, just like many of the empires in the East at the time. Now comes the European settlers. The first European settlers were actually the Vikings. They didn't create large colonies, nor did they stay very long. Leif Erikson is considered to be the first Viking to discover the New World. In 1492, Spain was the first official country to rediscover the Americas. The first British colony was in 1607. Many new things were introduced to both the settlers and the natives. The settlers brought horses, cows, and pigs to the New World. They also came across corn, turkeys, tomatoes, tobacco, beans, and squash. The settlers were also introduced to new diseases which made them sick, and were even lethal to some. But the diseases that these settlers introduced to the natives were a lot more potent and ended up wiping out whole tribes. Though it is important to understand that these diseases were not spread purposely, but were just a coincidence caused by tens of thousands of years evolving separately. Christopher Columbus from Spain was able to create colonies across the Caribbean. Juan Ponce de Leon, who is also from Spain, was able to establish colonies along Florida's southern coast. Spanish explorers were also able to explore most of the modern United States, Midwest, and East Coast, but were never able to establish colonies there. In 1540, Francis Coronado began exploring and setting up colonies in the Southwest. San Antonio, Albuquerque, Tucson, Los Angeles, and San Francisco were some major cities that were once small colonies. While forming these colonies, the settlers lost some of their horses, which were later tamed by the natives. Henry Hudson, an explorer from the Dutch East India Company, which was a company that controlled all of India and some of its modern-day neighboring countries, was set off to explore for a passageway through North America to Asia. What ended up happening was that Henry Hudson established New Netherlands and specialized its economy in the fur trade in 1621. To better establish the colony, the Manhattan Island was purchased from the natives for $24, and New Amsterdam was set as the capital of the new colony. To understand how much of a deal that was, for $24, the Dutch bought land that would, 403 years later, generate $886 billion in a single year. That year alone would be a $3,691,666,566,566.66% return. That'd be an average return of over $2.9 billion from then to now. This colony was eventually invaded and taken over by the British Empire. The colony was renamed to New York, and the capital was renamed to New York City. Sweden created a number of colonies across Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey to take part in the fur trade. These colonies were then invaded and conquered by the Dutch, who then were invaded and conquered by the British. Huguenots from France created Fort Caroline, near where Jacksonville, Florida is today. This colony was eventually taken over by the neighboring Spanish colonies. The French soon colonized modern-day Quebec and Acadia, as well as land that ran down the Mississippi River. In 1585, Walter Raleigh, on behalf of the British Empire, attempted to create a colony along the east coast of the Americas, but was never able to do so. 20 years later, though, colonies began to spring up along the east coast. The people who settled these colonies were people who were upset with the way of life of Europe and wanted to start a fresh new life. These people were even taught by the natives how to farm their crops. In 1607, Jamestown was the first British colony in modern-day Virginia. While Virginia was very disorganized at the beginning, with the discovery of tobacco, Virginia was able to establish a tobacco trade with Britain and create a stable economy. In 1620, the Mayflower, which was full of British settlers who were escaping for religious freedom, were headed to Virginia. They were blown off course and ended up in Plymouth. They struggled to survive as they attempted to create their own colony, but were saved by the natives who taught them how to farm in the area. Plymouth soon came to be Maryland. After this, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Maine also became colonies. Due to the land not being very good for farming, the New England area established an industrial economy. Between 1670 and 1732, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia were formed as colonies. Governors for each colony were chosen in London by the British government. These colonies eventually developed a higher standard of living than some parts of Britain and influenced many people to leave their home country for the colonies. Originally, slavery was not oriented by race, but by monetary status. Over time, slavery was recognized to be a trade taken by people with brown skin. This ended up making businessmen involved with the slave trade believe that it was best to import and enslaved Africans. With this, a new independent culture was forming in the Americas.